Every day I see it, can't get rid of that day. I spent so long trying to get it behind me, but it ain't going nowhere. I still dream about it. It killed the best friend of mine. I mean, all the guys were good friends, but it fucked me up bad. I blame myself for that whole day, and I will, because I was going to pull off from it. I even blame myself for the firefighter. I think I was 40 foot from the tower when it all come down. It hurt one pretty bad. Another one, we got him off, carried him off and set him down over, and I think he might have had a broke leg or something. So there, it killed 3 that day.
I got a call from Kenny, said there'd been an accident on the site, and he said, I got to go, got to try to take care of some of these people and stuff. In the meantime, I got a hold of different people around here, and I headed to West Virginia. We was up there maybe 3 days before we come home. Of course, OSHA was there questioning, wanted to know what we was doing, why we was doing it, and all of that. They wouldn't let us go back up to the tower site.
The first day there, we couldn't even get to the tower. There was 8 or 10 inches of snow with ice underneath it. We ended up renting a Bobcat. Kyle, one of the workers, spent all day long clearing that road where we could get up there. And I think we pulled the line off the hoist to get ready to rig it that next day. I couldn't remember what the temperature was. It was real low. And one day it come up, 45 degrees, so the tower was clear. I don't know if there was any ice on it. If there was, there might have been just little at the top, but I couldn't see it. They started climbing the rope up and stuff, and I told them to pull me a couple angles at different levels. I think one come out at, I won't say 80 foot, and the one down there low, it might have been 60 foot. So I just measured them and going to send them back up to them. And that's when I'd heard it might have been metal breaking and stuff. That's when the top come out of it and hit, slammed against it, and then it all come down.
Went out there the next day and met all the other contractors that was involved, and we went up to the site and got to looking what went on and how it happened, and we was just doing a modification, basically is what we was going to do. It didn't happen where they was working. It come from the top and come down from the top like this, and they were at the bottom 10 or 15 foot off the ground. You thought it would have done it right there instead of coming from the top and buckling down. So something wasn't right somewhere. February is when we went, or late January, and February is when we got there. Road was bad. Had to take a Bobcat, clean the road off to get up there. Ice, snow. I don't know how long we'd had to put them off from doing this job because it was so bad, and the weather was bad. They said it had been inspected before we got there, and they give it the okay.
After we cleared the road and everything, it wasn't real early when we got there. There was the inspector up the top. So we really didn't do much, because he was up there. My hands started climbing up. He was coming out. I think 80 foot was the highest that there was. So he met him somewhere there. He had stopped and told him, said, you want to watch that up there? I don't know what he was talking about, but that was never brought up again. And I figured that spot he told him to watch is what broke over. And when it broke over, it brought the whole damn thing down. Then later on, heard that the inspector denied saying that. I didn't know about that till after the tower fell. It's dangerous working on these old towers because most of them are going to be loaded and been there for years. It was a bad site. It had coax hung all over it. That tower's loaded. The clear spot on it was step boat legs. I had prints showing what was on there, and we didn't even know that they'd put another carry up there. Didn't know that till we got there. That should have been done after the beef up instead of before.
You guys weren't made aware of that?
No, we was not aware of that. If I'd have known that, we wouldn't even started that job. I'd have pulled off from it. I started to pull off from it anyway. Kyle even told me, he said, please, Kenny, don't pull off from it. He said, I'm broke. And that's when we went and rented the Bobcat and cleared the road we could get to it. There's a lot of ifs in that job right there. It'd been nice to know all that before we ever got there. You know, I blame myself for pulling them angles out, but it didn't happen there. It happened at the top, because I seen it all. Every day I see it. You know, can't get rid of that day. I spent so long trying to get it behind me, but it ain't going nowhere.
I got a call from Randall Shankles one morning. He had had a tower accident, and there were 3 people killed and 2 seriously injured. And Randall, I'd known him for years, had worked for me before, and his father even worked for me. And he knew that I had been involved as an expert witness in cases before. So he called me, I guess, for a little guidance, what steps to take next. This accident happened in Despard, West Virginia, just outside of Clarksburg. And it was in February. The 2 survivors that were working on the ground were there, and they both told the same story. They heard something, and they both looked up and said it looked like the tower was actually buckling at the 240-foot level. It wasn't just one tower that fell, it was 2 towers. The other tower, which was about 30 feet away from the bigger tower, was a 300-foot Roan 55. That's an 18-inch face well-to-section pipe tower. It was old. Both the towers were old, but it had not been well maintained. I mean, there was a lot of rust. It hadn't been painted. The guy wires were pretty rusty, and neither of the towers was well maintained. You could tell that. We're talking a tower that was obviously overloaded. 2 of the faces down in the lower 100 foot of the tower, 2 of the faces were almost solid lines. There was just no place to stand to move from one leg to the other to work on the opposing faces. The climbing facility was given little consideration by previous installers. There were lines and antenna mounts and obstructions throughout the entire tower with the climbing facility, which was step bolts on one leg. When the first tower started falling, it tangled up because the guy wires were interlaced, and then some of the smaller tower fell and got entangled, and it was just a heap of steel piled up. What happened was the smaller tower didn't fall all the way. I don't know what caused it to be hung up, but it was listing at about 30 degrees out of plumb. 25 or 30 degrees is what they described to me. But about 60 foot of it was still standing. And so as quick as the dust settled, there were men that were injured, and the 2 guys on the ground were experienced tower hands, and Joe Neal, I think was his name, was a young guy, ex-Marine, and is trained in CPR, and he kind of led the charge to make an assessment of what the situation was and how to deal with it. And he recognized, a couple of guys were already dead, and the 2 that were injured and entrapped, the power was out because when the tower fell, it took out the AC. But they had a generator out there, so they fired up their generator, and they got their bandsaw out, and they started cutting out steel, called 911 naturally. And then they started in the rescue to get the guys out that needed the help. They were in the process of getting them out when the EMS people showed up. It was the fire department. And the supervisor was afraid to go in where the tower hands were frantically working to get these guys out. They was afraid to go in because they saw the guy wires laying on the ground. He thought they were power lines. He held his firemen back from going in, but one of the young guys didn't have to go very far to help him get one of the injured guys out. I think he was on a stretcher, and so he ran in to give him a hand, and they told the firemen, keep an eye on that tower because if it starts to fall, you need to get out of the way. Sure enough, as they were bringing that one injured guy to the ambulance, the tower started falling, and somebody hollered, the tower's falling, and the firemen ran down the road. And it was just exactly the worst possible route he could have taken because the little tower fell, and he was wearing a hard hat. And but anyhow, it hit him in the head.
The one fell, damaged the other one, and killing the firefighter. And I'd told them to watch that tower right there because it was fixing, it would probably fall down. And I don't think I no more than got it out of my mouth, and it happened, turned around, and it hit the firefighter. He would come right kind of under it.
So he was transported by helicopter to the nearest hospital, and I think he died in flight, but he is a real hero. But but anyhow, they got the two injured guys out, and they got them loaded up, and they retrieved the bodies of the other two guys. And the next step was obviously to go in and investigate and see what caused it all, and that was where I entered the picture. The procedure was to remove a diagonal from the tower, take the measurements, hole-to-hole dimensions, transfer them to the new member, drill new holes, and then cut the member to length, coat it with cold galvanizing, and then reinstall it. And that's what they were doing. It's a slow process. But the problem with that Roan 80 was diagonal shared a bolt. Like the diagonal ran up from left to right up to the other opposite leg, and then it went from right to left up to another. When you take that bolt out, you disable two diagonals, not just one, two. They had one man down around the 20-foot level that was taking some measurements to do some base bracing down just above the pivot base, and had three men up at the 70-foot level, 72 foot, and that's where they were changing out the diagonal braces. I was a manufacturer, and I looked at drawings every day coming across my desk by engineers from all over the United States. And you could tell by the guy wire sizes, you just develop a feel for it. You know, by the loading you read, the guy wire sizes on the tower, and you already know the tower because you've built them before. And that was the reason they were doing modifications, so I expected it to be overloaded, you know. And it was. We showed 168% overload, and that's 168% over maximum allowable. But the overloads were not the diagonal, it was the leg. It was where the leg transitioned from 2.5 and the bottom 70 feet to 2 inch. That was the member that was 168% overloaded. And that just happened to be where they were hooked off and replacing diagonals. We went through and examined every leg, and we checked all the guy wire sizes and made sure they were the same size. We measured the anchor distances out from the base. We checked the elevations of the anchors in relation to the base. It was actually on a bit of a hillside. It was a mountaintop job, but it wasn't quite on the peak. One of the anchors was just about level with the base spear, as I recall, and the one long one that was down further down was the engineering drawing showed that it was 40 foot below the elevation of the base spear, and then one of the anchors was like 5 feet above the base of the base spear. So we got 3 different elevations, but that anchor that was down on the side of the hill looked a whole lot lower than 40 foot. I discussed it with the lawyer that was representing Mid-Continent, and he hired a surveyor to come out and check the elevation of that anchor. That anchor was 79 feet below the elevation of the base spear, not 40. It was almost double, and which makes a big difference, you know, because when we did the analysis, we showed on our analysis that anchor was only 40% lower, and we did another analysis and lowered it down to 79 feet, and we had a 7% increase in loading on the overall tower just because of that drop of 40 feet, excuse me. But all the member sizes were what they were represented to be on the drawing, and we checked off all of the equipment that was included on the tower, the listing of all the loading. And the tower had been modified once before, years earlier, and they put midpoint bracing. That was the only thing I noticed. It was really a pretty sloppy job, and the angles were much larger than what they needed to be. Truth be known, it probably did more harm than good because of the additional weight that it added, but we listed all of the existing abandoned antenna mounts and the lines, and they were increasing the load-bearing capacity of those bottom legs 2.5 times, and they found no need to modify the base pier. And Roan was not known for overbuilding anything. You know, they kept their costs down. The Mid-Continent adjuster came out while I was doing that, and we visited, and he said he had been in a meeting the previous day with SBA. They were modifying the tower to put a new carrier on it. They were planning on putting AT&T on there also. And so, well, that's the reason they always modify towers, to handle additional loads. But it didn't occur to me when he told me that until I got back to office, and I was going down my listing of all the antennas that I listed as being on the tower, and I was looking at the drawing, the original drawing that FDH had sent to Randall, and the loading that was listed there, and everything that was on, there was nothing identified as future on the new antennas. And so I went back, and it occurred to me that they had already installed the antennas and lines by another crew before Randall and his crew came in to do the modification. Yeah, they sure did. There was a PAN, it's an advisory notice is what they call it, that was published, and wireless estimator that I found that had previously been passed by TIA. I never heard of it, but what it is, it was a policy where for the benefit of the people in the area and the need to have a 911 emergency service, they found that it was better to let the carrier go ahead and bring the antenna and line people in and do their installation before they did the modification, because, you know, for the protection of the people. I'm sure they had 911 service before they installed those antennas and lines, but I felt like all along that it was, you know, to keep generating income was what it was. Nonetheless, they allowed them to downgrade the standards for a period of time, and I never did get it straight, but I think they far exceeded that period of time. You know, the carrier was supposed to be given a certain amount of time to bring it up to standard with the modification crew, but I never did find out exactly when the cutoff with that was, but it wasn't very long. It was only about a 60-day extension that they had. So the tower was already had, with the 168% overload, it already had the additional loading added to that. So with the additional drop and 7% additional loading in the tower, plus the antennas and lines already being on there, well, I don't know what the number went because we didn't do another study, but to be sure that I was correct, I sent that same package, engineering package, like what we did in our office. I sent it to 2 different PEs, and of course I created a different scenario. I didn't tell them it was Despard, West Virginia. I told them it was just a customer, but it was the same category, the same exposure, and same classification, you know, and sent the same loading, but it was a fictitious, because I figured if they knew there was a lawsuit involved in it or, you know, a fatality, that they probably wouldn't respond to it. But they did respond to it, and they came back with the exact same thing that we did. Oh, I say exact, it wasn't exact, but it was close to the same results that we found. So I was very confident that what we were talking about was accurate. The most important thing on a project like this is basically communication between the engineers and the installers, because the installers do not have engineers on staff. There's a few that do, larger installers that have much bigger companies may have an engineer on staff, but most installation crews do not. They rely entirely on the engineering firm that does the analysis and puts the package together, and that was FDH Engineering. I noticed on the original tower profile and RISA output that they sent to Randall, there's a spot on that cover sheet that that shows the maximum overload of any member in that tower is. But that line item, it can be eliminated from the printout just by the operator, deleting it. And looking at the engineering package that Randall had, that was blocked out. And like I say, I've known Randall for a long time. He was one of the best directors, if not the best director, in my opinion, in the whole NATE organization. And I think had he known that what the percentage of overload was and the location of that overload, I think he would have at least put some temporary bracing in there, or he would have declined to do the job completely. But that's an assumption, but I'm an installer also. I was an installer. I know exactly what I would have done if I'd have seen it. But I was used to looking at drawing packages all the time. We were manufacturer and we had an engineer on staff. Randall didn't. He relied entirely on the engineering by FDH, and he used that as a guideline. They did not instruct him to use any temporary bracing. That was left to his discretion, or the installer's discretion. I found it kind of surprising that when the entourage from FDH and SBA showed up, and there were about 6 or 7 of them at the same time we were there, and they hardly even looked at the tower. They spent more time looking at what we were doing than they did at anything else. But what they did was they started inspecting Randall's equipment, or S&S communications equipment. They pulled the line off the hoist and inspected it. They were looking for violations that they could, where OSHA could cite the installer. So, and in a case like this, if it does go to a jury, where a jury has a hard time understanding the details, just like the lawyers do, because it's a different situation and most people are unfamiliar with.
Killed some good boys that day. I feel like if we'd known that stuff, maybe that wouldn't have happened. I blame myself for it. I even blame myself for the firefighter. I blame myself for that whole day, and I will. I'd like to know what that inspector was talking about up there, that spot, because if I'd known that, we damn sure wouldn't have got on that tower. Shouldn't have got on it anyway, after they had already put that other antennas and mounts up there. If you're a tower hand, you carry your balls in a bucket and you're going to do the job. You're going to try to do the job. But when they put you under a little pressure, you're going to go ahead and do it. Try it anyway. We got bucked off that day, that's all I know.
If it'd just been these tower climbers, it wouldn't have been all over the news and everything else. But when the volunteer fire department guy got killed, that was a different story. And I guess they actually sued the dispatcher that sent them out and everybody. That's what we heard, that the dispatcher even got sued because he sent them out there to the site.
This is the West Virginia one, right? I don't think the West Virginia thing was an isolated case at all. And I honestly don't think you would have heard much about it had a first responder not been killed. I think you would have heard tower collapse in West Virginia, technicians dead. And that man, that hero who ran in and got killed, is what made the story big. Someone from outside the industry dying inside the industry. I don't think he's the first responder to get injured or killed in the first responder in an accident. So God bless him, and the tragedy around all of this is that, no, it's not isolated. And if you trace back, and there's video of this, you can find this video everywhere. There's that famous water tower collapse. There's the famous Houston collapse where 5 guys were riding a section and the cable broke. That's a structural issue. Did they overload? Was it a crane? Was it their fault? That was way back in the beginning of this thing. And you actually can watch these things. They're morbid. They're not fun to watch, but they happen. I think there's many towers out there just waiting to come down. All these towers, many of them were built in the 50s. Many of them were built 75 years ago, and they're still being used. They were designed to hold a certain amount of weight, period, right? And they keep adding and adding and adding. You'll see a monopole, a 120-foot monopole, got 5 carriers on it. Okay, you could say, and it's all right to say it's Verizon, it's T-Mobile, it's all the way down the line. Okay, so that to me is an overloaded structure. From my understanding, it was a tower that had been condemned and shouldn't have been anybody on it anyway. I wonder how many towers out there that need to be condemned that we're working on, that we're actually putting more stuff on. It is the most game-changing thing in the world since the invention of fire is the cell phone. And face it, it is. And nothing comes close to what this is. How important it is to people's everyday lives, but there's a blood price for it. It'll happen again. It'll happen again. It'll make wireless estimator, right? It'll make the local news, and then people will forget about it. They'll forget about it, and that's the shame of it. I wonder if it was another field, would they forget about it, right? Because if you, in the reality world TV, the unreality reality world, no ice road trucker ever fell through the ice. No crab fisherman ever died, or a ship sank, okay? All these dangerous, dangerous jobs. Nothing ever happens, okay? But it's happening almost monthly in the tower industry, sometimes a lot. We have these spates where nothing happens, but that's usually when there's a slowdown in production. There's a slowdown. When they do a kick-in, when a new G comes in, watch the death rate skyrocket because they're throwing people out there that shouldn't be there. 17-year-old kid, right? With a summer job in a man basket in Iowa. Cable breaks, 3 guys come down. Name was Mick Williams. Beautiful kid, right? Didn't even start his life. Now it's over. Not his fault. I can't blame the tower for that. I can blame the equipment on that too. And that's another thing. If you're rigging stuff, if you're running heavy stuff with the drum winch or whatever, you better make sure that equipment's in good shape. So I think the bottom line answer to your question is what happened in West Virginia is, and I'm not the voice of doom, it'll happen again. It'll happen somewhere else for the sole reason that no one should have been on that tower. There's a simple way to put it. You wouldn't overload a bridge, right? You wouldn't do it. You wouldn't overload a circuit board, right, or a breaker box in your house, but you'll overload a tower. And these towers are rated, like I said, they're rated very specifically by very smart people for a certain amount of weight and a certain amount of wind load, and they have to be installed in a certain way. But when you go slapdash shoving 5 carriers on a tower that was really made for 1, maybe 2, you're exceeding the limits of what this tower can handle. It's not often these things come down due to those overloads. It happens. And men who die on those are the ones that are totally innocent of what's happening. They didn't make a mistake. They didn't pull this tower down. They didn't screw up. They just happened to be there at the wrong time. And there's dozens of these instances across the country where these epic failures in structure occur.
We didn't have a written procedure how we was going to do things. That's what they kept pointing to. Whether it been right, you would never been at the bottom. You'd start at the top and come down. I do think we got overpowered. Big money. I mean, we was the bottom of the bowl. We was a small fish in the whole bowl, you know, SBA, FDH, you know, and then the telephone company we was doing it for, and I don't remember who the carrier was we was doing it for. The FDH, they lied through their teeth to us about the other jobs we had sitting on the ground, you know, $700,000 worth, and they called and said, get them sent out and we'll pay you. Well, once we got them sent out to the other jobs, they wouldn't pay us nothing. We had to swallow it. We had to eat that $700,000. So, but they lied through their teeth. They said they was actually going to pay us. They had people who was going to do them, and we sent them out, and we never got a dime out of them. It was always hurry up and get there, get the job done. We had a good lawyer. We really did. I wish we'd had him from day one, but we didn't know, you know, what to do.
Randall, of course, you know, for his own protection, he went ahead and shut S&S Communication down, and he sold off their equipment. They had an auction. They went out of business. FDH Engineering was never called on to account for these issues that came up. SBA was never called on to account for their involvement because, you know, they were the tower owner. The carrier was never called on to address any of their responsibilities. A citation from OSHA is just a kiss of death. And Randall got caught in that trap, put him out of business, and he was very successful as an installer.
I went bankrupt, sold and folded the company up. I wasn't staying in it. So yeah, I got out of the business. Went bankrupt and folded the company up, sold out, and put me in the hospital. I had a brain bleed, a stroke, I guess they could say. Stress, they said. So intensive care 9 days in Oklahoma City.
As far as me, I went out on a few more jobs with Randall's other crew, and I just couldn't get myself back into it. I was done that day. I'd go and operate, do a little bit of that, but
I felt like the testimony of the two eyewitnesses had some value there, but that was not the popular opinion. Of course, the popular opinion by everybody that came up there, with the exception of myself and the two survivors and Randall, was that a bunch of Okies came out and took out too many diagonals. Tower fell and wound up killing 3 people. But the bottom line here, the system worked just exactly like it was designed to work. There were 3 people killed and 2 people seriously injured, disabled, and they were the collateral damage in a case where the tower fell, and I'm sure the tower was insured, and I'm sure the tower owner, SBA, got a new tower out of the deal. I don't know if they had business interruption or not, but I suppose they did. And if that's the case, they had no interruption in cash flow. They got a new tower and they got paid their regular amounts as they went on, and and the installer, there were two guys died and 2 guys disabled, and then the fireman, there was a rescue personnel died as a result of this tower that should have been condemned. Who knows? Had those antennas and lines not been installed on that tower before the crew came in and started working on, maybe the tower would not have fallen, because it's just additional loading is what it is. And we also got to remember that they had come in, another crew that SBA had hired had been in there and done a plumb intention on that tower just a month or so before the installers came in to do the modification. And it was in February, so if it was warmer, which it may or may not have been, if it was warmer when they did the plumb intention and then it got cold, and it was cold up there the day that accident happened, well, those tensions are just going to increase on that tower because the steel contracts. So that's additional loading that's put down there in that area where these guys were working. Of course, the carriers, they've already got their firewall up, their protective veil. They've got themselves protected from punitive damages, but it's all driven by money. They cleverly word their contracts and their purchase orders, whether the need is necessary to use temporary bracing is left to the discretion of the installer. So, okay, you're the installer, so, you're the one that's got to make that decision, not us. And they hope it works, they hope there's not a problem, and usually there's not, but sometimes there is. Often, what we're seeing is they're going out to a big installer who is going out and finding small independents to go in and do the work. And so now then the bigger installer, he puts his markup on, and the small independent comes in, and they beat him down. They beat him down to as far as they can on price, and so he's got to do it faster, and he's got to do it for less cost in order to make money. Those guys, they're in a spot, because if they don't work, they don't eat. And so they're in a predicament. Well, I know I'm not going to be eating any very good, but eating anything is better than not eating. A guy that's green as grass asked to go out and climb a tower, he has no earthly idea if it's a safe tower to climb or not. I mean, I suppose that's to a point, you know, obviously if his legs are rusted completely through, you know, anybody would know not to climb it, but most of the tower climbers aren't exposed to the engineering and manufacturing like I was. One of the first jobs I had was in like 1958. Working in a fabrication shop, so I had a little more familiarity with it than most of those guys do. But we didn't have any idea. We didn't have any idea if a tower was safe or unsafe. Of course, whoever we were working for was saying it was safe. Don't worry about it. You know, go ahead and get it done. But we relied entirely on our supervisors, you know, and if they said it was safe to go ahead and do it, we'd go ahead and do it. You know, as we got older and more familiar with some of the misses or near misses that happened, well, we started developing knowledge, and then when we started working, because I was a contractor that worked on built towers for several different companies, a dozen different companies, you know, and they were all similar. Majority of them were similar in leg size and bracing size, and you kind of develop some instinctive feelings about if you go on a tower where the legs are extremely small, you're immediately aware of it after you've been doing it for years. But when you first go out there, you don't have a clue. The communication that exists is, for instance, I mean, in the case with West Virginia, I think if Randall had known, like I said, if he'd have known what the condition of that tower was before he went in there, he may not have even accepted the job, but he did. And he relied on the engineering he got from FDH, and we know what the results were there. Randall lost a man just about a year prior to his accident that he had there. A kid that was up on the tower, and he was hooked off to a step bolt, and he just leaned out too far, and and he fell out of the tower. And there's at least a dozen cases where you can find the most dangerous tower out there to work on, the monopole, and every one of them is equipped with a damn step bolt. And there's no braces that you can stand on. There's no braces you can grab hold of. You know, it's really an extremely dangerous tower. I've seen it when guys lean back in their lanyard thinking they're hooked off, and they hadn't hooked off yet. I never saw anyone fall, but I saw them reach out and grab the tower. We got to quit telling these tower hands, quit preaching that mantra, what you're doing is safe, because what they're doing is not safe. I don't care how many lanyards you got. If you're working 200, 300, 400, 500 foot or more in the air, you know you're not in a safe environment. Quit planting the idea in their head that if you're wearing our equipment, you're never going to die.
You know, that first accident, I take the blame for that. All I can say, it was somewhere in Missouri. I can't remember exactly where at. That morning, I'd went out and started the horse and got it dogged down. You know, doing my things. I didn't see that he didn't have his monkey tails on. If he had had them on, he wouldn't have used them. He had got broke in with some older hands that, held with them monkey tails. He got up there and hooked off. I don't know if his hook rolled, what happened, but I heard him scream and looked up, and I think that tower was 330, brand new tower. And I took off running to the base of the tower, and I looked up about halfway there. He had rolled over and looking straight at me about the 150 or 60 foot level, and he landed just a little bit out of my arm reach. I was going to try to catch him, but what good did that done? But that instinct, you have that. I don't know if I called 911 or had called to it, but I was over there doing CPR, and blood was just coming back up out of his mouth. I had it all over me. I got up and left him, and as I was leaving him, that first responder was right coming, and he said, "Man, don't give up." Told him, leave him alone, he's gone. And he got down there, and when he done it and he got up, he said, "Man, I'm sorry." I said, "Yeah, me too." I guess in the lesson of this, everybody needs to hook off 100%. Use your monkey tails. It'll save your life. Pretty sure the other hands knew he didn't have it, and that's where everybody needs to, look out and take care of each other. because, you know, I missed it. His life would have been saved that day if he had used them, had them on, if I'd have seen it. A lot of ifs there, but everybody needs to keep watch out for each other because you could save their life. That was a hard experience because he was a young kid, had his whole life ahead of him. I blame myself for that. I'll eat that one. That was a tire business there, you know. That's the way it goes. Yeah, I'm watching it real time. It will fuck you up. Can I get off this chair?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.